we're able to use that essentially as a NIC and join that network. So that at that point we don't have to really reverse engineer anything. We're there, right? And so so basically, if you've got a meter, to Nathan's scenario of something that you took off of a abandoned building, or waited till your neighbor left town and cut the very secure little metal pin with a bolt that's like what, like a meter or a millimeter thick off of there, then you can take this device and in a lot of cases just directly interact with it.
So with the with all types of modular devices, right, and known interfaces, you're going to be able to find some sort of documentation on that and figure out how to speak to it, right? With some cases, I think is it what, DLP3? DNP3, sorry, that they just released an open source Linux stack for that just in the last couple of months.
Yep.
And we'll probably see more of that as it goes on, right? With more of these types of devices where you're going to be driving it yourself, and development teams that are wanting to code that themselves for various reasons for flexibility.
And there's there's an and on the other side of it, and that's where like I say, we tend to be more in the open standards camp. There's a DNP3 stack that was just released under Apache license, and then there is a GPL C1219 stack as well. For us that means at the end of the day, if we can interact with that device and we can write fuzzers a lot easier, things are going to get better, not worse, from that in the long run, right?
Right, because otherwise, right, it's the well, I guess it sort of gets down to your zero-day and full disclosure types of discussions too,
right.
About sort of philosophy. But we would like to see more bugs known about and fixed, rather than more bugs that only, say, China or the U.S. government know about.
Yeah,
right? Somebody who's well-funded in that side of things.
Right. It's more free bugs. That's right. Yeah. So, one of the points that we found with a lot of that, and in talking about like the meter tampering stuff and things like that, is that the traditional way that you would just from like a theft of service kind of perspective, and actually something that was pretty cool that we found out, we really had no idea, is that all utilities actually have like a fraud division that does this stuff now. They actually will have a list in certain target neighborhoods, I guess, of people that they know don't have service, and they'll drive around at night and look for lights on, right? And so they kind of get how to do that now. And the typical way that that's going to happen is basically you're slipping some guy $50, he's pulling your meter off, and then he's taking the load side and supply side and just jumping across to where the meter's out of the loop, or you'll actually see things like physically changing gears in a analog type meter to make it read slower, stuff like that. Well, in this case, with the new shiny stuff, you don't have to mess with all that really hot 400, like, I'm resistant to 110, but not at 400 amps, I don't have to worry about any of that, right? I've got 5 volts on a little board, right? And, I might just, say, for example, be able to take a cordless drill and pop through the cover on something and, add, a resistor to the wire that's actually doing the meter read, and I just drop my bill by, 50%. So, as an example.
Right.
Not that you did that.
Yeah,
no,
just as an example.
Right. Yeah, and so, some of the other stuff that they're doing the utilities aren't stupid, right? And they've been dealing with that type of physical attacks and theft of service for a long time. So they've got a lot of people that are doing things like looking at, say, trend analysis stuff, and especially going forward with some of these things where they're able to get much more advanced, knowledge of what your usage looks like, and they will send people out to your house if things look funny, right? Yeah. So you still have sort of that, meat space control of like real brains that are looking at this thing, and that will be able to come to your house and arrest you if you've been stealing service.
Yeah, and if your demand looks like this, right? There's just a big just canyon where it just drops off. That's that's pretty obvious. The thing about, and that, like a larger point too about sort of on the AMI side in general, is that instead of directly interacting with voltage coming from from the provider, you're now subverting the data that they're gathering, that they're trusting in some way, shape, or form. Like that's really what you're more interested in at that point. And so if you can do that in a more subtle way, it's not necessarily going to get picked up. Right. But yeah, they absolutely, and one of the reasons, one of the motivations for a lot of the utilities in AMI is that it will give them a better idea of those kind of things. That they will see this really obvious drop if they have a theft of service in a traditional sense. Yeah, I think we have that.
Yep.
So.
Ooh. Oh yeah. So in general, with all of these types of things, you're going to have utilities that have to have some way to interface with their networks, right? So not only do you have all of the things that are say, controls around trying to keep out, people that they don't want to have, in there, so keep out like consumers from messing with their meters. They've obviously got to have some way to interact with that network. So we found that actually to be one of the most interesting places that we looked at, and dealing with sort of the software that the utility has, and how that works, and sort of how they get their magical God keys that can talk to all these things, and then really pulling that apart. Yeah. It's a sort of an equivalent of the default account type of problem that we have everywhere, where they made 1,000 devices and they put the same account on all of them, and then they hand out that password. Well, there's obvious problems with that if one gets compromised, right, then maybe they can do whatever they want with that. You could have potential issues across multiple utilities with different companies being able to access each other's stuff if it's the same product.
Yeah, well, and from the vendor's perspective, though, right? So you're selling this new technology, and you've got this customer that's you've got a lot of these vendors are startups, right? And so they've got like 5 really big customers they want to keep happy, and those 5 customers come back and say, all of our field guys, like for the old meters, they could put a voltmeter on that and see what's going on and everything, and now they have to log into a website. What? You got to do this other thing, and so. They end up rushing out these devices that do some of the interaction with a meter or other network devices without really thinking through a lot of that. And so we've seen things like signing keys on all of those.
Yeah, and we like to parallel it to some of the thoughts around say like the cellular world. So there's been talks at DEF CON in the past and Black Hat in the past, right, about the types of software that's used to directly access, say, GSM cards or whatever, right? And that software is certainly illegal. Like you can't, you're not allowed to have that unless you are a licensed installer or whatever. But you can find it on every single torrent site out there if you know what it's called and know to look for it. So we're not in that state yet with this, but it would seem to parallel very closely with the type of environment and types of scenario. So if someone were to get a hold of certain types of devices, certain types of software, and be able to pull it apart, what's to keep that from getting released and becoming public? Mm-hmm. And then how do you protect against that once that occurs? Because all your infrastructure is already in place, right?
Yeah, and we found that's more of a, I guess I'd call that white box testing. We found that when we were given access to one of those field test devices that there were lots of undocumented commands that were under the hood. If you actually, pulled the application into a debugger or extracted the special firmware that they used, you would see all these commands that weren't known and weren't documented anywhere that that did things like enable security, disable all signing and all security for this device, and
magical functions that were hidden under there but weren't actually hooked up to, say, any sort of the GUI, so you weren't supposed to be able to get to it. But like, I'll just reattach this here.
Right, hardwired default passwords, a lot of that kind of stuff. So yeah, just in general, an observation that's something that we think is kind of interesting. Yeah, I guess So yeah, on the other side of it, so the reason we're all talking about AMI is because we're all getting paid to go look at AMI, right? And there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of concern. It's visible to consumers. I mean, there's I think like 2 states now that have class action lawsuits where they're questioning the accuracy of their AMI, their smart meter deployment, their particular utility, and all these kind of things. And so, we're doing a lot of stuff with it, and we're talking a lot about it. But the real money and the real driver between all of this, and what this really comes down to when we talk about what's now called green energy and all of that stuff, is about actually getting the grid, the whole thing, not just your house.
And not just that little node at the very end that we all think about and that everyone's talking about right now. but yeah, the entire architecture that's behind it.